get started, and whoever joins, they can just hop right in. So I want to welcome you all. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Antonius Skipper. I'm an assistant professor of gerontology at Georgia State University in the Gerontology Institute, where I primarily study all things Black. I study older African Americans who are in romantic relationships and look at romantic relationships across the life course. On behalf of all the members of Black in Gerontology and Geriatrics, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar, which we've entitled Empowering Communities, Black Perspectives in Gerontology and Geriatrics. This work is sponsored by or supported by the Aging Federation for Aging Research, as well as the borough's Welcome Funds. We have several expert panelists with us today who are going to share their expertise and really engage you all. Joining us today are Dr. DeLon Canterbury, Dr. Tanisha Hill-Jarrett, Dr. Ethlyn Mcqueen-Gibson, and Ms. Sonja Gunter. They'll share the insights on how we can leverage Black voices in the field of aging, really empower the communities that we serve. So just to give a brief overview, we will have our planned moderated questions, and after that, we will have about 10 minutes for question and answer. But you can feel free to drop your questions into the chat box at any time. So if there's ever something that brings about a burning question, don't feel like you have to hold on to that question. Simply drop the question in the chat. And once we get to the Q&A portion of our panel, we will be more than happy to answer those questions. To provide context for our panelists, I'll give you 3 minutes to introduce yourselves. I know there's so much to talk about, and many of you all are very well accomplished, but just try and limit it to 3 minutes just so we can jump into our moderated questions. First, we'll have Dr. Canterbury, then we'll go with Dr. Hill-Jarrett, then Dr. McQueen-Gibson, and last but certainly not least, we'll have Ms. Gunter. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Dr. Canterbury, we'd love to hear from you. Is he here? I think he may have fell off. All right, we'll come back around to that. Dr. Hill-Jarrett?
Yeah. Hi. Good morning, afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Dr. Tanisha Hill-Jarrett. I'm a neuropsychologist and an assistant professor at University of California, San Francisco. I'm at the Memory and Aging Center, and I do a combination of research, clinical work, as well as community engagement, with a majority of my time spent doing research as well as community engagement. And my research focuses on psychosocial stressors, but also measuring and tracking structural racism and sexism and how that may be a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease among aging Black women. I am a part of the Black African American community outreach team here at the Memory and Aging Center. And I also facilitate workshops with Black women called Radical Imagination, where we use Afrofuturism and creative aging to reimagine what the world could look like.
I'm muted. Thank you, Dr. Hill-Jarrett. Dr. Canterbury, it looks like you may be back with us. I'm not sure. It may be frozen. Let's jump to Dr. McQueen-Gibson, and then we can circle back if needed.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hail from Norfolk, Virginia, where I am a professor at Old Dominion University. And I am also on faculty as a professor in the Department of Geriatrics and Internal Medicine at Eastern Virginia Medical School. I actually fill 3 positions. I actually am a registered nurse and an adult nurse practitioner. So I fill the positions of being a clinician when looking at caring for older adults. I also work in academia, preparing undergraduate nurses, but I also work with PhD and DNP students. And then I also currently am a part of 3 research studies. So I'm one of those Black nurse scientists who also take care of those in the sphere of aging. So I know that later on we will be talking about that. And then also I have worked at 3 of the HBCUs Howard, Hampton, and currently I'm on adjunct faculty at Norfolk State. And that's my claim to fame, and I'm going to stick with it.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Dr. McQueen-Gibson. Dr. Canterbury?
I think I'm here. How are you
go.
all? Appreciate the patience. I'm Dr. DeLon Canterbury. I'm the founder of GeriatRx. We are a novel approach to managing medications, specifically in older adults. We started this company about 5 years ago. I am a geriatric pharmacist by trade, hailing from University of North Carolina. But I grew up in Atlanta, and so I went to Emory for undergrad and saw that there was a need for advocacy in terms of pharmacoequity and seeing disparities, not just in rural and urban settings, but among people of color that are aging. So after, unfortunately, having my own grandmother diagnosed with dementia and was given an inappropriate medication, an antipsychotic, if you will, it actually spiraled a lot of her symptoms out of control, worsening her irritability, wandering, and confusion. And at the time, I wasn't a pharmacist, but it eventually encouraged me to really look for the problems in our health system that we maybe neglect, especially when it comes to people of color. It came to realize that our family found out that it was really just one medication that caused all the issues. So much so that we were able to get the medication stopped. We were able to reverse some of those symptoms of dementia. And we were able to let my grandma live up to see the age of 90 in an assisted living facility because we saw that the medication was causing more harm than good. So that inspired me as a pharmacist to get into geriatric medicine and aging. Currently, I have a passion for de-prescribing. You'll hear me use that word a lot, but it's the safe removal of medications in older adults that aren't really doing you any good. And we currently have a pilot project with Duke and the USD Prescribing Research Network looking to implement the first African-American focused med management study using a community intervention with AME Zion Churches. So we are partnered with AME Zion Churches here in Durham, North Carolina, and we're driving this dialogue on how to advocate for less medications in our older adults. So honored to be here and share more insights on what this can do and what this can mean for being Black while aging.
Thank you, Dr. Canterbury. Definitely look forward to hearing more about that shortly. And Ms. Gunter.
Hello, all. Greetings from Atlanta, Georgia. I am a nurse CEO, certified dementia practitioner. I'm also certified Alzheimer's disease and dementia care trainer. So I own a company called Senior 911, in which we provide private duty home care. We provide transportation. We provide a trademarked program called Camp Memory Care, which is a fancy way of talking about cognitive stimulation therapy for those to slow down the cognitive decline. We also have Angel 911, which is a nonprofit that provides free respite care to those that can't afford services. So when we talk about the caregiver, I have a team of about 85 caregivers in the field. I'm also a daughter of a father who has Alzheimer's, so I know it from a personal standpoint. Spent 21 years in caring from the community hospice senior care. So I've seen the gamut from the Midwest, where I got my nursing, here to Atlanta now the past 10 years. So as an executive director, sales director, wellness director, just being able to have a good viewpoint of caregiving from that aspect. And so now my world is wrapped up in the care of these folks through the business, personally again, and also got my degree in healthcare management and working on my neuroscience degree now because brain health is so super exciting for me. So I'm at Arizona State University working on that degree as I run these businesses. Y'all pray for me.
Absolutely. We're going to keep you lifted, sister. So thank you all for the introductions. Now, if we could jump into the questions and get started. Again, if you have any questions that come up as our panelists are speaking, feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll revisit those during the Q&A session. For those who are on our panel, feel free to chime in whenever you have something to say as we kind of go through the moderated list. But to get started, I first want to ask, why is it important to empower aging Black communities? Why is that important? And whoever wants to go first, feel free.
Well, I'll just start out as an educator because education is important. And many times in our community, we have improper information. And so we are the best messengers in our community. And so we need to bring that message to all the generations. And so that's why when I'm educating in undergraduate gerontology classes, I try to bring appropriate information, and then they take it to grandmother and auntie. And then when I'm out in the community doing community engaged research, it's great when they hear the message from someone who looks like them because they're more inclined to listen to the message. And so empowering our community comes in various ways, but lack of information, our community perishes for lack of information.
I agree. I think that's a great point, especially considering, all the attention around misinformation and the importance of this concordance in identifying with folks who look like you and can be representations of yourself, seeing yourself in spaces that you may not have otherwise have thought about. Others, why do you think that empowering aging Black communities is such an important topic?
I think also, in addition to having that critical information, I think being empowered is really the first part of taking a step towards the better version of yourself. So it starts with your own internal belief, but I also think it's about the confidence other people instill in you. And I think it's a critical component of addressing health disparities. And so with me, I focus on Alzheimer's disease. So I'll often be speaking from that standpoint. But I think it's the difference between using like a strengths versus deficits-based model. And I think historically, and even now, present day, Black people are oftentimes pathologized, and there's a certain level of blame that's placed on the Black community for having a higher rate of a specific disease or Alzheimer's disease. And I think part of it is that people don't consider the assets that we have as a community or the strengths that we have and what we bring to the table and how that can be leveraged, how there are things that are intuitive to just Blackness in general that can be a protective factor or something that's leveraged to empower Black people to live healthy lives.
I completely agree. Which points to that importance of having these within group studies and understanding what's going on with just Black folks as opposed to always wanting to compare. Dr. Canterbury, Ms. Gunter, anything that you all would like to add? I think you're muted, Dr. Canterbury.
Thank you. Yeah, we're still playing catch up from the historical inadequacies from this system. So that gap still needs to be bridged by a lot of the people that we have in this room today. And yeah, I agree completely. It starts with education. It starts with meeting people where they are. But until we have those voices in the room, we're kind of just still in this behind the eight ball from just the blight of our history here. But there's also a richness in our history that I think can be used to bring people together, to bring efforts just like this and have these frank discussions, whether it comes to financial planning, when it comes to management, when it comes to dementia care, et cetera. Generally, we just need more people there. And in order to at least curb the trajectory with an ever-growing population of a more diverse population of different cultural and ethnic backgrounds, we need our system to have this not just awareness, but understanding of how to culturally communicate. And so it's going to start with our own people. It's going to start with people that look like us and have that invested effort. So apart from just a general need, I think it's I mean, not just a must, but it's required for us to holistically treat all people. And it's not always something we can find within a health system, but it starts with a dialogue.
And just to add that, to kind of bring it together, everybody said the absolute told the truth about it. Trust, I know I heard somebody mention that trust is so big, as we know in our community. And so we're going to take information or glean information from those that we feel like we can trust. And even then, sometimes it's a challenge amongst ourselves. That's a whole nother conversation about why we don't trust ourselves at times. But having that relationship, and knowing a safe place to go, which is why I love the works in the church, because the church has always been a staple and a backbone of our community. So those efforts in the church, I think, are a great place to start in conversations like this, for sure.
Thank you all. Thank you all. All great responses. All great responses. So building onto that, I'd love to know in what ways have Black professionals and researchers contributed to the empowerment of aging Black communities? And feel free to use your own work and the things that you've done to kind of give us examples of what that may look like.
Well,
I know for one,
go ahead. Go ahead,
I'm
Sonja.
sorry, Dr. Gibson.
No, go ahead, Sonja.
For one, the respite services have been really paramount in the community. I talk about home care and it's a business, right? It's mission minded. It's not money driven. If it is, you're in the wrong industry. But with that said, there are bills to pay and there are salaries and payroll to meet. So you have to charge. And so when you're charging $32, $36, $38 an hour, that's a huge financial burden. So creating respite for those that need it the most, they need a break, that just need to have some support. I am proud of the work that we're doing by providing that. And not only do we provide respite through that service, we also provide education for and training for caregivers so that they can continue to provide the care, because a lot of times neglect is happening or abuse unintentional, but still it happens because lack of knowledge and lack of understanding of what I'm supposed to do. You're thrown into this role and not prepared. So offering those tools and resources also in the community have been something that we're just super proud of. And other organizations that are doing the same thing. We're not the only one. There are other organizations doing the same thing.
Yes, yeah, but I love that, and pointing to kind of that lack of understanding, that the lack of knowledge that you may not have, but even bigger than that, the lack of resources, right? Because if you have the resources to go out and you don't have to think about paying this $36, $38 an hour, it's completely different when that truly is a sacrifice and you're having to balance, going to work with mom being taken care of. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Dr. Mcqueen-Gibson, you were going to add something?
Well, I wanted to add that, we talk about research. And so many times our community looks at research as that taboo thing, especially a lot of older adults. They think about Tuskegee or they think about Henrietta Lacks, right? And so I think the onus comes on us. How do we get them to engage? So I really love the research that we've done here in Hampton Roads, Virginia, where we put together a community advisory board that looked like the community, where we wrapped around the researchers so that if they did something wrong, we could tap them before it happened. And so that community advisory board was comprised of not only just the members of the church, because everybody doesn't go to the church, but we had people from the beauty shop and the barber shop. We had people from the NAACP and the Urban League. We also had people from the area agencies on aging, because that's where all the older folks are, right? And so they wrapped around they wrapped around the researchers, and we launched what was called Purple Power Worship. And so we went into the churches and we talked about it over food and fellowship. But one of the things that I had to teach our geriatricians is that when we're eating food on Sunday, you can't be in one corner and the people in another corner. And you got to take off your ties and your jackets if you really gonna do research in our community. And then again, we might not always be at the church. So you also have to take the message to the Juneteenth program. You got to take it to the Jack and Jill program. You got to take it to the Divine Nine. You got to take it to the Beauty and the Barbershop where we sit for 3 and 4 hours. And so that's where you got to empower people and don't act like you're concerned. You got to really be concerned if you are really a researcher. And then I think the last follow-up to empower our people, the literature now supports it, is following up with community health workers who look like and who are a part of our community, because then they help to follow up with everything that we're teaching, because the researchers can't always stay there in the community 24/7. And so with all of the research that I'm working with, community health workers are written into my grants.
Thank you. Thank you. I love that. Dr. Hill-Jarrett, Dr. Canterbury, anything that you all would add?
Yeah, I just kind of want to build on what Dr. Mcqueen-Gibson said, because I really think that traditional academia perpetuates these social hierarchies that we're oftentimes trying to combat. And your approach is like leveling the playing field, essentially. And, you know, traditionally, academia makes these distinctions between the researcher and the researched. And some of the work that I've been trying to do, particularly with using Afrofuturism, is to be a co-creator of knowledge with people in the community. And so for me, I see Afrofuturism as a way of knowing that's intuitive to Black people, but also a way of creating new knowledge that centers Black people's lived experiences as well as their desires for the future. And so with the workshops that I do, I work specifically with Black women, asking them, okay, so 100 years from now, what should society look like if racism, sexism, all of these things were no longer a thing? What needs to happen, and how can we leverage the strength of the Black community to get us there? And so I think that's important and empowering in some ways, because it affords people a sense of agency, something that I think oftentimes, at least historically, Black people have been stripped of, right? So agency to not only design the future, but to put you at the center of the future.
Yes, great point. I mean, I completely love the community-based participatory research on all levels, like threading folks, you know, in every aspect of the work. And I thank you all for the work that you're doing in that. I was just talking to my class recently about that. And I know we have Dr. Fayron Epps on, and she does a lot of that. But just including folks, not just in the work, but in the research as well, whether they're presenting the research or, you know, whether they are visiting these conferences with you. Like, I think that's so essential to empowering Black communities. Dr. Canterbury, anything you like to add?
I'll really echo what Dr. Mcqueen-Gibson had mentioned. That partnership with CHWs, especially in the height of COVID, was pivotal for bridging resources and battling some misinformation, and fostering some of those relationships built within the nonprofits on the grassroots level with health systems and with people that can provide vaccinations was just groundbreaking, really, to really, again, hit those needs. And part of what we're doing with our project is using kind of a similar model, but we're using the churches as the hubs. And I agree, not everyone is religious, not everyone's going to be going to a faith-based community, but we were kind of looking at partnering with all the clergy pastors and all the AME Zion priests, and they've already been used to doing this type of research and getting genetic tested and whatnot. So now these partnerships built from COVID are leading to the grassroots project we have today to implement more of an educational de-prescribing or med management approach. And it's starting from people that we trust, people that you're already going to go to. So I can only echo how much having that messenger look like the person you're trying to send your message to is just pivotal in this type of research. And I agree, research isn't taboo. It shouldn't be, but there is a blighted history that we have to address. If you're not talking about that, you can't just come in with a white coat and say, hey, here's what's up. You have to meet people where they're at, be yourself, and have a genuine desire to make it sustainable after you've already left. That's the key to this.
Great point. Great point. Just be yourself. And I love that, you know, as far as just kind of keeping it simple, you know, because oftentimes we show up in these white coats and we represent these institutions that are larger than ourselves, but, you know, we really have to allow people to see our true selves. And many times that can take time to build a genuine rapport with folks and really have those real relationships. And so I know that all of us kind of do this work because we have a passion and we have a drive to do this work. But I also want to build on that and ask a question about how can we ensure that Black professionals and the voices of Black folks and researchers in this field are more widely recognizable? Like, how can we ensure that we are recognized in this space? And I think we have a number of folks who are watching who are students and in different points in their career and really trying to learn how to navigate this space.
Use your voice, man. Use your story, use your voice, use your why. And I think with the ease of, I guess, access to social media, I cannot highlight how much that's been able to get the word out nationally about this issue with overprescribing in older adults. But no matter your area of expertise, meeting people where they are, and I think social media is generally free, and it's something that everyone most mainly has. So I'm really a big proponent of telling your why and using that as the crux of your discussion when relating to people and what their problems may be or what you're trying to address. And starting there, of course, builds rapport, but we all have a voice. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I was a shy dude before this business. Like, I wasn't even thinking about talking on stages. It just ended up being a part of the work of passion. So I didn't know the power I had from being vocal or being in the room or just encouraging a student or, a patient who's dealing with caregiving, which is, another big topic. But I think it starts with that. And like, it doesn't have to be a pretty NIH studied, funded project. It could be simply a dialogue at the barbershop, at church, at dinner, at a wedding, hopefully not a funeral. We kind of do things when people die in our communities. Like, we want to wait till it's a better moment. Do it when you're just sitting with your mom. Like, talk about it, financial planning, talk about what can help someone with a genuine interest. So, and then you have to sometimes repeat. I know I'm stubborn. I got to hear it a couple times, but I say this to say, be consistent, and you'll find your tribe as you keep projecting what you're preaching.
To add to that, the collaboration. So when you find the tribe, I know when I started out in this, I was introduced to Dr. Faye Ron. And from there, she, pulled me kind of along with her in some different efforts. And from there, met this person and that person, and now involved in a documentary and traveling with the documentary and just being on different panels. So I also say, to that point about the NIH and the studies, and it's all great and it's all relevant, but don't get intimidated by all the doctors and all the clinical research study, because that can be intimidating at times. I found myself intimidated. I said, wait a minute, I'm on the same stage, on the same platforms as I am today, without the doctor in front of my name, because I have a passion and a vision and a mission that I've been called to do. So figure out what your purpose and your vision, your mission is, and then collaborate with those. And we all bring something to the table that's necessary, and don't ever negate or think that what you have is not valuable, because it is, and just jump in, sink or swim, jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the message that I have for the students on the screen, and probably anyone else, is that we have to take our seats at all tables. And so I currently serve as the president of the Southern Gerontological Society. Now, 10 years ago, I was a student in my doctoral program, and I attended the program, and I thought, well, who are those people? But now I said, I need to have a seat at the table, pull up my lawn chair, because it covers the 14 states of the South, including the District of Columbia. But they make decisions for people who are aging. So who better to make that decision than this little short Black woman who knows a whole lot about my grandparents and my parents and me and everybody else. I'm just as smart as everybody else. And I'm planning the next conference that's going to be in Birmingham, Alabama in April. And I hope that every student knows that we actually give students scholarships. How about that? And then after that, we're going to be in Dallas, Texas in 2026. That's where decisions are made. You have to come to the table. And if you think that you might be having a little bit of imposter syndrome, don't think about that, okay? Because you are just as smart as everybody else. You have to be at the table. The other place is that I pulled up my chair at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference, and I submitted my work on community engaged research. I was told it's probably not going to be accepted because they accept all the big researchers and everybody else. You know what? I had a podium presentation. And by the time I got off the podium, all the drug reps said, Dr. Gibson, can I talk to you? And I said, after I have me some food, I have to think about it. I'll talk to you a little bit later on, okay? But see, do not ever forget your why, okay? Mm-hmm. Your why has to be your community. And so now after I went to Philadelphia and all of those 10,000 people were there, I'm not an imposter. I'm just as good as everybody else, and so are you. And so you have to start thinking about, where can I have somebody cook me some chicken dinners and something else or whatever, and I'm going to make it there, and then I'm going to make a difference for my community. That's what you have to do. That's my message.
Thank you. Dr. Hill-Jarrett?
Yeah, I agree with all that's been said. And really what I'm hearing from everyone is taking that well-deserved seat at the table. And what I want to add to that is bringing other people with you. So as you're climbing, lifting other people as well. Yeah. I think it's also important to not have a scarcity mindset. And oftentimes we were like the one of one, maybe in high school, maybe in undergrad, and we were always the excellent, student, maybe the only Black person in the room, right? But recognizing that there's space for everybody. And I think the system wants us to feel that competition between one another. But really the way that you make the change is by bringing those with you that have that same vision. And so not having that scarcity that it can only be me, this kind of crabs in a barrel mentality, is really, really critical, and bringing others along with you as you climb.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great point. I think everyone made really good points. And so the short of that is, you belong, you're needed, pull up a chair and bring a friend. And I think there's no better way to say it. Sit your imposter syndrome or whatever it is to the side and know that you are amongst family. And I think, in speaking to the Black experience, a lot of time that's what it's been about. And it's been about the social connections. It's been about helping one another. It's been about, leading others up the ladder. And so I thank you all for sharing those things. And thinking about that, I think, kind of in knowing where we're going and where we want to get to, we must also know and understand kind of what we have to go through. And so I want to ask, what are the key barriers that Black professionals and their experiences in advancing the work within the field? What are the barriers to advancing the work in the field, especially when your work involves empowering Black communities? What stands in the way? And maybe that's something related to your experience or just some gems that you could share.
I think that sometimes just not having the conversations with the organizations that might make the decisions about accepting your work. So, case in point, maybe for me, the Alzheimer's Association. And we're great friends, but they are in our community, and sometimes they don't always understand the language of my community. And so I think that it is my responsibility to help them understand the culture of my community. I have to help them gain that cultural competency that sometimes they don't always really have, right? And so you have to fellowship with them in a better way. That's our onus too. And so once you do that, then they go, oh, I guess I didn't really understand that, right? And then once you start helping them understand their lack of cultural competence, whether it's them, whether it's another organization, it's all for the good of the community, right? And so I think that that barrier needs to be broken down. Sometimes we're waiting for them to come to us, but sometimes we need to go to them because we got to do it. Again, I'm always thinking about somebody else. And then the other thing too is that sometimes we got to call things the way they are in our community. Sometimes when I'm doing a presentation at a church and everybody's kind of like, just really not listening. So the first slide I throw up on the board, I'll put up, the last one I put up was a Wendy Williams, and everybody was like, they started turning their heads, and I said, oh, everybody awake now? And they're like, yes, Dr. Gibson. Okay, now let's have a conversation. They're like, yes. I said, okay. Now, some of that may have been true, but some of it may have not been true. But there is still a health disparity in our community. So now let's have a conversation. So you have to bring everybody to the table and help them understand in a way that it helps them. So.
Thank you. Anyone want to add something? What are the barriers? What might we have to go through to get to where we want to be?
I think that Dr. Mcqueen-Gibson makes a point. I'm the one that sometimes I get side-eyed because I get on our community a lot as well. We have to be responsible or accountable for some of this, some of the barriers. And so we can, the barriers that are there, we know they're there, they've been there, whether it's racism, whether it's economic, whether it's opportunity, right? And then some of the barrier though is just us in saying that. I know I personally and others go out and we provide information and opportunity and resources in ways that are just above and beyond. And sometimes you see the same people circulating through, getting the same, it's like every conference. I know here in Atlanta, especially, every conference is the same people, the same speakers. You're like, can we shake it up a little bit? Let's mix it up. The same participants that are coming, the audience. And we have the same problems. So how are what we do with the information after we get it is sometimes the barrier. We don't do anything with it. We collect all the pamphlets, we collect all the information, we have every handout, all the bullets, the recordings, but we don't collectively bring it together and say, okay, now what are we doing? How are we moving this forward? I don't want to keep doing the same conference and having the same conversation. At some point, we should start seeing, okay, now the conference should be about solution and not just information and we're just talking and spinning wheels. Show us what have we done? What have you taken back to your community? What have you taken back to the church? How have we made a difference? Have we seen a slowdown in cognition? Have we in the cognitive decline, excuse me, have we seen, have you taken the resources back? And there's so much information out here and I know we're pushing it, but what are we doing with it when we get it in our hands? So I think sometimes we can be our own barrier by not continuing the conversation or the work or the efforts outside of us that are on the front line. We can't carry the whole mission. We can't carry the whole purpose.
Right. I really like that. Because so often we look outside of ourselves and we have the big barriers and we oftentimes don't think of the things that we may be doing to hold ourselves back. And, that's human nature to kind of feel a certain way when someone says, hey, what's the barrier? I guess you, hold up now. But I love that. I think that is a great point. Anything else you all will add?
Well, and I think that you're right because, just recently, again, because a lot of us are teachers here, but the Lancet actually just came out with an article that talked about the 14 things that we can do to prevent Alzheimer's. And one of them was achieving a 12th grade education. And so when I talk to those in the community about that, they go, what? And I'm like, yeah, how about that? And they go, you mean we can even just start by completing our education and getting our hearing checked? And I said, how about that? So that takes us back to our ownness in our community. where my grandmother always said, how about just finishing school, right? The simple things that we can do that is not on anybody else but us in our community, where we can actually break down the increased incidence of Alzheimer's in our community. It goes back on us.
We have an initiative that we're starting. There's a doctor out here that we're putting something together with brain health and having the conversation start with that 18 to 35-year-old group. Because by the time we're 65 and talking dementia, the dementia's already set in. We know that 20 years prior to this first symptom, there's brain changing, right? So we're talking to the grandma, we should be talking to the granddaughter and the grandson.
Yes.
And there are things, again, that we can do and prevent. So our push is going to be, is not going, it is to the younger audience and start educating there. And it sounds so crazy, and they're invincible and they don't get it, but trying to stop or change some lifestyle, have some lifestyle modifications earlier. So when you get that 65, we hopefully see the slowdown there.
Yeah.
True life force.
I don't have much more to add to that. Pretty well, pretty comprehensive.
One thing that came to mind for me is more of like an individual level factor for Black professionals, and that's burnout, being burnt out, and the emotional labor that comes with really doing this work and often existing in settings where we're the only Black person, and having, being Black in the workplace is definitely a thing. There's racial and gender stressors, a number of different things that can contribute to burnout. I think we're also tasked oftentimes with mentoring minoritized individuals, disproportionately so, which I think it's important to do that, but it's also important for us as professionals to have boundaries around that, right? Because it's like, if we're not around to do the work, then who will, right? If we're burnt out, we can't carry out this work. So I think having boundaries around it, recognizing you can't do it all, recognizing that and acknowledging that. And it's a fine art. There's a balance to doing this work, and really knowing when to set up those boundaries is important.
Very great point. Very great point. Thank you, Dr. Hill-Jarrett. We have about 4 minutes. I want to ask one really quick question because I think it's pretty big picture, and then we can get into the Q&A from those in attendance. So really quickly, I want to hear from you all about how can we ensure that the voices and experiences of Black researchers and practitioners are included in shaping policy? Like, how do we go about addressing the issues in policy as just this little old practitioner or this little old researcher? What do you all think about that?
Data. Policymakers don't care unless you have a number that's going to affect their constituents or bottom line or a vote. So you need to bring data to say, hey, this is hurting your demographic. This is how we can try to work together on this. So, and of course, that's going to change with every few years in our government. But I would say you have to start tracking your data. You have to start collecting everything. I know we have a lot of researchers, so that obviously that's happening, but you have to also have timing, and you have to think creatively. And is this a problem that I can make, I guess, front of the table for them? Because they're thrown with hundreds of different political issues that they have to, think through. So you have to speak their language when it comes to policy, and then you also have to work with them. So you need to build partnerships and have those key stakeholders involved at the table, which Dr. McQueen alluded to earlier about having that seat. So I would say that's the first step, is having that seat, but you got to come with an intent and data that's going to be a mutual beneficial solution if you guys work together. At least that's my end of trying to make political change.
Great point. Thank you, Dr. Canterbury. Anything else you all would add?
I agree. I think as a person that does quantitative, but as well as qualitative research, I think data and numbers are important, but people's lived experiences are equally as important. And the stories that come with the stories add the context to the data. And I think from a policy standpoint, we need those stories. We need to amplify those stories. We need to amplify people's lived experiences in relation to their like the policymakers' understanding of the data. So it's, I think for me, how I think about it is it's really both. It's both that contribute to that change.
Agreed.
And then I think the other way to make sure that our voices are included around policy decisions, again, is if you are the expert in aging, whether it's in academia or the clinical setting, or you're a community advocate, you will have to serve in your community. So during COVID, when we were having vaccine hesitancy in older communities, they asked for someone to serve on the governor's task force for the African American community. So someone had to raise their hand. But just like Dr. Hill-Jarrett said, you have to have boundaries to know when too much is too much, right? But you got to have a seat at the table, because if we're not at the table, somebody else is going to be making decisions for us, right? Then you have to think of other times where do we need to show up? So most recently, we had a National Centenarian Day, right? Everyone turning 100 years old or older, right? And so they said, well, we need a keynote speaker. Well, who better than someone who looks like who most of those centenarians are? It happened to be a Black woman, and that Black woman was Dr. Gibson. And so out of all of those 20 some odd centenarians, along with the governor who was there, it was good for the governor to see somebody who cared about those who were aging. So think about where those intersections can be, where you know where policy is going to change. And it doesn't have to be Democratic or Republican, but just show up. And then the next time when they're making some decisions, they're going to say, well, maybe we need to call either Dr. Hill-Jarrett or Dr. Gibson or Dr., some of us, and we have to have a seat at the table because they're going to be making decisions about people in our community. So that's another way that you can also do it.
Mm-hmm.
Then invite us to their table, table.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I want to end our kind of planned questions there and jump into the Q&A from those who are watching with us. And so we have a few questions here, and hopefully with the permission of the person who dropped this question in, I want to ask this question together for students. Don't ask double barrel questions. I know I teach it every day, but I'm going to combine these two questions because I think they're very interesting. So the first part of the question I want to ask is, do you all ever feel like you're carrying the burden of your community on your shoulders? And then the second part to that is, how do you address the hurt that the Black community has experienced over the years? And the person says, I've been faced with this when I go in with good intentions, but the community has been repeatedly hurt by researchers and professors. So do you ever feel like you're carrying that burden? And how do you address the centuries of hurt that the Black community has faced?
I kind of touched on that earlier about, the accountability. And that comes from feeling the burden of, right, the same conversations. And it can be overwhelming. It can feel very tiring. So yes, to that part, absolutely. Feeling like we're carrying the burden, but also feeling like that's kind of when you're purposed to do something. My pastor always says, don't abort the mission, don't abort the assignment. And so when you have an assignment, it's more than just, no matter how tired you get, your arms are held, the people around you who are doing the same work, we hold each other up. And we do. And I know, because I've been on the phone in conversations like, are you tired? I'm tired, and, without the funding to do certain things. I mean, it's a lot. In terms of the centuries of the hurt, I do believe that sometimes, that's a great question. And this is where someone like myself, who does not have the doctor in front, I'm less intimidating at times. So I can get into certain areas or certain audiences more or more effectively than someone who comes in as I'm doctor this, I'm doctor that. And not that there's anything wrong with it. I would love it. And, you know, that's my aspiration. But I say that to say sometimes it's changing the face. It's changing the, not coming in as the credential, but coming in as the work and making sure that the other stuff is sometimes your bio is not necessary, you know, going in. Sometimes your bio can be very intimidating to some people. And even myself, I mean, without the doctor, just coming in on the level of where they are and meeting them where they are at seems to be a little bit more effective than coming in with research and data and all the important things like the policymakers need. When it's our community, we just come in, we got our sneakers and tennis shoes, and, you know, and we're going to come in like your auntie and, you know, big sis, little sis, you know, and just help.
Thank you. Anybody will add to that?
I think the other way that you just break down, you know, centuries of hurt from researchers and what's happened to our community is that you have to come alongside and build relationships. Before you ask for anything, you have to have a relationship, period. You know, because so many times researchers have come in and said, this is what I want, this is what I need. But, you know, we need to build the relationship and ask the community first, what do they want from us, you know? And so that's what we got to do. And so that might take months. And I know that many times if you're a researcher and you have a grant, you might have a deadline, but you know what? You might not meet your deadline, you know? And so, but the community has to come first. And and that's the only way we're gonna abolish the bad feelings. And so, and we have to say to the community, I'm a researcher, I realize that, but you're my community and you come first. And if we don't stand on that, we're gonna kill ourselves every time.
Yes. Yeah. Great point. Great point. Another question that I want to ask, and I want to get through as many questions as I can because I think we have some really rich ones, is what advice would you give to young Black professionals who want to pursue a career in gerontology or geriatrics?
Reach out to anybody on this room. Honestly, you got some of the heaviest hitting people who not only helped influence me, but I've learned from even from today's call. I mean, these are amazing people who are well connected. So make an immediate connect, get on LinkedIn, send that intro, ask for a coffee. Do not be afraid to ask for help. That's the fastest way to get to whatever goal you want to desire is by asking for help. So mentorship, mentees, it's critical. Reach one, teach one. That never goes away, especially in aging. So we all got, you know, contacts. So email, text us, call us, be consistent and show love, you know, and it'll come back to you tenfold. I
agree. And also know that you're needed. You're needed in this space and the work that you're doing is important. And I feel like don't be discouraged by other people's imposing their views on if your work is important or not. So I'm thinking, for instance, like if you're applying to a grant, right? I think a lot of the approaches and methodologies that we use, particularly when engaging with the community, is not considered empirical or validated according to white normative standards. And so if those are the methods that you're using, you may face a lot of rejection and it's challenging. But I think you should be encouraged because there are people like ourselves on this panel and other people that are doing this work and we're making it happen. And there's workarounds to that as well. So just know that you're needed and there are people willing to help you.
And to that point, oh, I'm sorry, Dr.
No,
McQueen. I was just going to add, you can be passionate about the community, but still do the work that helps everybody. We have to understand that dementia is universal, right? And so I know for me, a lot of connections and what I've gotten has been by working with everyone and being available with a passion for community, if that makes sense, but not cutting yourself off from others or being where people don't want to work with you. because you're coming with an attitude or coming with this, a chip on your shoulder. This work is plentiful, and wherever you can get help, it may not be a brown person that can step in and help. It could be somebody from another area, but has the same kind of passion. So just being open to collaborating with a lot of different people, understanding where your passions lie and taking the mission where it needs to be, but not cutting yourself off from communicating with others that are dealing with the same issues.
And then I just want to wrap up and say, you never know where you may start and where you may end. I started out with a 30-year clinical career as a nurse. And then I actually spent part of that time in the military. So I'm a military veteran. So then after being a military veteran, then stepped into saying I needed to have another seat at the table and obtain a doctorate degree. So whatever the mission is that actually Ms. Gunter said that you need to accept the mantle for, you never know how your journey may take you zigzag to get there. But when you get there, you have all of us here to support you. And we're all here to take care of those who are aging, because no matter who you are, everybody is going to age. But it would be nice if it could have some people that look like us to help you get there.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is the perfect wrap up, and we're right at 2:00. I know we have a couple other questions out there, so I want to encourage you all to feel free to reach out to those who served on our panel. Thank you to our panel. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I learned so much from you all, and I'm just, thankful to be in a room and among you all. Thank you to our audience. I hope you found this experience useful. I hope you found this meaningful, and I hope you learned a lot as well today. And I just sincerely thank you all for your time and for spending it with Big. Enjoy the rest of your big week. I think this is a great platform, and I truly appreciate the Big folks for giving us this platform and allowing us to share. So thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.